With vaccinations slowly rolling out around the globe, you may have heard that the country doing the best right now is Israel. And it's true, with a major caveat, as I'll get to. But first, as BBC reports here, coronavirus Israel leads vaccine race with 12% given jab. Now, this is a couple days ago over the weekend. I'm sure the number's higher right now. They're on pace to vaccinate almost everyone by March or April, which is incredible. But of course, as I said, there is a major caveat. As The Guardian reports, Palestinians excluded from Israeli COVID vaccine rollout as jabs go to settlers. Now, before I get into this, I will say that this isn't as black and white as the title makes it appear. There is a lot more to this, as the Palestinian Authority has say over the occupied territories in terms of vaccinations. That said, Israel is the occupying force, and they have the ability to vaccinate Palestinians in the occupied territories, which is why you have human rights groups coming out and criticizing Israel over this. But there is some nuance here, just to be fair. So getting into it here, as The Guardian reports, Israel transports batches of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine deep inside the West Bank, but they are only distributed to Jewish settlers and not the roughly 2.7 million Palestinians living around them who may have to wait for weeks or months. Meanwhile, the cash-strapped Palestinian Authority, which maintains limited self-rule in the territories, is rushing to get vaccines. One official suggested, perhaps optimistically, that shots could arrive within the next 2 weeks. So they're working along with the World Health Organization with a partnership called COVAX, aimed at least getting 20% of Palestinians vaccinated. So the Palestinian Authority is trying to work to get these vaccinations. At the same time, there is a reason why human rights groups are coming out and criticizing Israel. Israeli officials have suggested they might provide surplus vaccines to Palestinians and claim they are not responsible for Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, pointing to 1990s-era interim agreements that required the authority to observe international vaccination standards. Those deals envisioned a fuller peace agreement within 5 years, an event that never occurred. Almost 3 decades later, Israeli, Palestinian, and international rights groups have accused Israel of dodging moral, humanitarian, and legal obligations as an occupying power during the pandemic. So the gray area here is that the Palestinian Authority does have say over how these vaccinations are rolled out. But of course, the occupying force, being the Israeli government, has the ability to vaccinate Palestinians in the occupied territories, and they simply are not doing it. So one of those human rights groups that have come out to criticize Israel is Gisha. This is a human rights group based in Israel. So Gisha and 14 other Israeli, Palestinian, and international health and human rights organizations say that Israel must provide necessary vaccines to Palestinians. So here's what they say. The Israeli Ministry of Health has not yet publicly formulated an allocation policy that includes reserving specific amounts for Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territory, nor has it established a timeline for the transfer of these vaccines. However, Article 56 of the Fourth Geneva Convention specifically provides that an occupier has the duty of ensuring, quote, the adoption and application of the prophylactic and preventative measures necessary to combat the spread of contagious diseases and epidemics. This duty includes providing support for the purchase and distribution of vaccines to the Palestinian population under its control. So, the Israeli government has the legal obligation to provide vaccines to Palestinians in the occupied territories. And they simply, right now, are not doing it. Now, at the same time, look, it's in their best interest to vaccinate everybody, because that's how you develop proper herd immunity. If you are only vaccinating certain members of the population in your territory, then you're not going to develop the herd immunity that's necessary to actually combat the virus. So this is why this is not a black and white issue completely. Oftentimes when it comes to these the Israeli government's human rights abuses against Palestinians, it is a little more clear cut. This one there's that gray area there because of the Palestinian Authority and their responsibility in this as well. But of course, they lack the funds necessary to properly provide and vaccinate Palestinians the way that the Israeli government is providing those vaccinations. And because Israel is the occupying force, they have the responsibility here. Now, before I end this video, I want to give credit to a politician. Doesn't happen very often. But here, Charlie Angus of the NDP in Canada. He shared this article that goes into detail on this issue. And of course, he got criticism from an Israeli group calling him anti-Semitic for sharing the obvious fact that the Israeli government has the responsibility to provide vaccinations. There is this stupid idea that somehow criticizing a government can be anti-Semitic. That's insane. These are criticisms of the far right-wing Israeli government, that a government does not equal the Jewish people. So Charlie Angus, unlike most politicians who would fold under the pressure, he actually stood strong, released a statement discussing his objections to what the Israeli government is doing, while also discussing how he has stood up for the Jewish people. So this is a rare politician. You will almost always, first of all, it's rare to see a politician actually stand up and criticize the Israeli government, but when they do, and they get pushback from groups like this, they almost always, 99% of the time, fold. Charlie Angus actually stood strong to the facts, standing up for the oppressed, and he deserves credit for doing that.